Hi, everybody. This is David Nevins for Citybiz List, and welcome to our program today. So I know this sounds a little bit odd, but I will be interviewing David Nevins. Now, that doesn't mean I will be talking to myself, though I do that quite often. But in fact, our guest today, believe it or not, is also named David Nevins. And so David, welcome to our program today.
My pleasure. Thank you, David, for having me. Appreciate it.
It's indeed our pleasure. So, David, you are we're going to talk about something called the Fulcrum, but before we do, you are the founder of the Bridge Alliance, which is heavily involved in the democracy reform movement, something I think many of our viewers would like to learn more about. So, tell us just a little bit about yourself, David, and the Bridge Alliance and how you got involved in what is known as the democracy reform movement.
Sure, I'd be glad to. Thank you, David. I'm a businessman who actually was never involved in politics at all until about 2011. I followed it very closely, but I didn't find it appealing. I thought it was all about people talking past each other, people feeling they had all the answers, and really a lack of critical thinking. And so while I followed it closely, watched all the news shows and read extensively, I never got involved until I happened to been watching TV one day and saw an organization, No Labels, which still exists. It's a Washington, D.C. organization. They now have the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is a caucus of Democrats and Republicans trying to work together. And I became casually involved with them. And after being casually involved, I became extremely involved and was on their executive board. And one thing led to another, and I helped them because my business is in a college town, start some grassroots organizing on college campuses. And then I got involved in the Aspen Institute. And through my work there, I discovered that No Labels wasn't the only organization trying to get citizens more civically involved and engaged. And they weren't the only organization trying to eliminate the dysfunction that exists in our democracy, and did some research and found out there were actually many hundreds of organizations with budgets collectively in excess of $1 billion a year, working in various levels of creating healthy self-governance. And from that research came the Bridge Alliance, which is now an alliance of 100 organizations working in various realms of not only democracy reform, but civic engagement, bridging the divide that separates us as a country. And we try to offer them capacity building, ways they can amplify and scale so that the average American who really only hears two sides of the story realizes there are alternatives to the present system. And that's essentially what the Bridge Alliance is. And we've been going now for roughly 7 years.
You know, David, I think number one, I'd say kudos to you as a business person for investing your time in trying to make the country a better place. And I know a number of us and a number of our viewers are, concerned about the future of our democracy. So I know you're doing good work toward that end. Please keep it up. So, David, along those lines, the Bridge Alliance recently assumed control of something called the Fulcrum, which is the fulcrum.us. Sure. And so tell our viewers what the Fulcrum is and how they can, again, learn more about your work.
Well, it's been over a year now. We actually took over the publication from another entity May of 2021. So we just celebrated our 1-year anniversary. And it related to what I just told you, that the Bridge Alliance has over 100 organizations doing remarkable work, but most Americans don't even know that an alternative exists. And we believe we are a movement and can become a significant movement to move the ball in democratic reform in our country. But for that to happen, Americans have to know and have an opportunity to read about the potential reforms that we're working on. And that's the vision of the Fulcrum, to provide a daily news source, op-ed source, a source of information as to what's happening. And we've been extremely successful. We're very proud of what we've accomplished. We have close to 300,000 eyeballs or viewers a month, and they come from various sources. Anybody can subscribe to the Fulcrum for free at thefulcrum.us. But many of our readers come from a relationship we have with the Tribune News Service, which a lot of local newspapers across the country subscribe to, and a lot of our articles are picked up in local newspapers across the country. So we're very pleased with the momentum in the last year, and we hope to increase our budget substantially in our second year, and hopefully with that will be the increased viewers and impact.
I know you've already grown the Fulcrum readership significantly. You've expanded the number and types of stories. You're nonpartisan or bipartisan, whichever in that regard. And I know, David, you are particularly proud of even having started some pop culture content in the Fulcrum. So tell us a little bit about how you probably never viewed yourself as ultimately I'll call you the publisher of a newspaper, of an online newspaper, which is what the Fulcrum is. So are you enjoying it? But more importantly, tell us about how you've expanded it and what your role is.
Well, I actually do enjoy it a lot. I enjoy meeting and talking to a lot of writers who have a different perspective on what healthy self-governance is. So that part I enjoy a lot. But I really enjoy meeting young people. We're trying to, ultimately, the success of our democracy depends on the younger generation. And we hope to engage them. As a matter of fact, this morning we had a call with 2 interns, one from Syracuse University, one from Tufts University, who are now going to be writing for the Fulcrum. So I think having the perspective of younger people is critical, and that brings me great joy. Related to your first question, and perhaps going back to my youth, I believe there's a deep connection between democracy and pop culture. I'm old enough to remember Woodstock. I'm old enough to remember the civil rights legislation of the early 60s and the important impact music had on political movements of the time, particularly related to the Vietnam War, civil rights movement, et cetera, et cetera. So we now have a pop culture section, which will have 2 purposes. I think there's a deep connection between the two. And it's not just music, it's theater, it's dance, it's poetry. And related to engaging the younger generation, I think the Fulcrum cannot be a wonky digital publication with deep analysis of esoteric subjects like redistricting reform or the intricacies of campaign financing reform. Yes, those are critically important, and that's an important part of our coverage, but to really engage people on an emotional level so that they want to become involved in change, I think pop culture is critical. And I don't think someone of my age should lead that effort, and we're getting more and more young people becoming contributors to the pop culture section.
Well, as I've known you, David, you seem pretty well aware of pop culture, so I'm not sure that I would put myself down if I were you. I can tell you that as a much younger person, I remember attending the anti-war, Vietnam anti-war protests and seeing Peter, Paul, and Mary perform there. So I think we share that from our younger days.
Well, as a quick aside, And excuse me for not knowing exactly. I had a conversation with the daughter of, I believe it was Peter, it might have been Paul, who runs an organization now called Music for Life. And she believes deeply, obviously because of her father, in that connection. And we're going to start having coverage from Music for Life in the Fulcrum in the near future.
That sounds great. Very exciting. I know you briefly mentioned it, but you've recently started a partnership with Tribune News Service, a national organization. Just talk a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
Well, I'm not that fluent in it. Fortunately, the media company we work with, which is Nevins and Associates, that's the other Nevins, and David Nevins that's interviewing me, did connect us with the Tribune service. But I know they have a deep, it's a subscription service, I assume, with local newspapers across the country. There's an economic crisis in local journalism now where it's difficult for them to afford to have the big staffs doing all the writing that was done in the past. So now they are looking for worthy news stories, op-eds for their newspaper. And we've been really fortunate in having many of our stories picked up through them, and that's been a big help. Another, in addition to people who subscribe, and we hope that that'll double in the next 6 months, we also get a lot of stories picked up through Google searches. And we have hired someone who's helping us with Google trending analysis so that we understand what is really in the minds of Americans at this moment in time, and trying to have our articles within the context, of course, of our main mission of healthy self-governance, of having our articles and headlines oriented towards what people want and are interested in today.
So, David, just more or less in closing or near closing, talk a little bit about what you hope. You've grown the Fulcrum substantially. I know you want to continue to do that. Feel free to share any details that we haven't touched upon, but what do you want people to learn from reading the Fulcrum, and how do you want them to react, and how the healthy self-governance, the pro-democracy movement, you're investing a lot of time and a fair amount of money in this effort, as well as a successful career businessman. What do you hope people get from it?
Mostly what I want them to get, and that's through another project of the Bridge Alliance that's deeply connected to the Fulcrum, is that just reading about stories and op-eds and learning is really not enough to change. The American city, it's all in the Constitution, a Declaration of Independence, the phrase, "we the people." And for our democracy to survive, democracy should not be a spectator sport. We need more citizens involved. So Citizen Connect, citizenconnect.us, if any of your listeners want to go to it, is the second part of the process. The Fulcrum is more about ideas and learning and thinking. But how do you turn those ideas into action? In Citizen Connect, we have a database of 400 organizations across the country. So if someone goes to Citizen Connect and they want to do something in their hometown to become involved, or they're particularly interested in a particular aspect of our democratic process, they can go to Citizen Connect and learn of what they can do, when and where. It gives updates as to events all across the country, both in a time-sensitive fashion and a geographic location fashion. So that's a deeply connected part of what we're doing. And that relationship has just started, and it's been very successful. We have Citizen Connect implanted within some of our writings, so people, as they're reading a story, can see what events are tied to the particular subject that they're reading about.
That's great, David. And I know for many of our viewers who are interested in reading the Fulcrum and getting it on a regular basis, and potentially even participating and sharing your own ideas and thoughts, which I know, David, you encourage readers to do, you can be reached at thefulcrum.us. So,
Yes.
and so I would urge people to take a look at that. David, did I leave anything out? You are, again, a very successful businessman. Most of your career has been as I guess I'll call you a real estate developer in State College, Pennsylvania. Go Nittany Lions, right? And now you are leading, you're one of the leaders of the nation's effort for people to participate more aggressively in pro-democracy movement and the like. So a pretty good change, I would say. It's, I guess, David Nevins 2.0, right? And I'm talking about not just David Nevins times 2. That's us, but your second career. How are you enjoying it? And I'll give you the last word here.
Well, it's a challenge. I do a lot of speaking on the road, and people tend to quite often say, I agree with what you're saying, David, but there's no way you can change the process. It's just too fixed, too much money involved. And I go back to a standard line I use. I can't promise that anything we're doing will actually make a change, but I can say one thing with 100% certainty, that if no one tries, if everybody is just too busy and satisfied with the status quo, nothing will change. And that's our endeavor with the Bridge Alliance, the Fulcrum, with Citizen Connect, to convince citizens that they can make a difference if they just give it a try.
Well put, David, and thank you for joining us today.
Okay, you're quite welcome. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
So this has been David Nevins interviewing the other David Nevins, although he refers to me as the other David Nevins.
Right.
In any event, you've had the both of us, and this is again David Nevins for Citybiz List. The other David, thanks for joining us today, and thank you all for watching. We enjoyed having you.